Hello and welcome to Digital Mindfulness. This is episode number 49. My guest today is Oliver Burkeman. He's a Guardian journalist based in New York and the author of the book, The Antidote, Happiness for People Who Can't Stand Positive Thinking. And he also has a popular column on psychology called This Column Will Change Your Life. In this fascinating interview, Oliver and I talk about everything from conscious computing to the impact of constant connectivity. I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I did. Hi Oliver, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being a part of it. I'm wondering if you can just give us an introduction to you and your work, and especially why your work is so important.
Sure. I'm a columnist for The Guardian newspaper, and I wrote most recently a book called The Antidote, Happiness for People Who Can't Stand Positive Thinking. And I also have a book of those columns collected called Help, with the subtitle How to Become Slightly Happier and Get a Bit More Done. I write, I guess, broadly about psychology and self-help and productivity and a little bit of philosophy. And, it feels like a sort of single domain to me, but I'm not always sure it looks that way from the outside. I live in Brooklyn, in New York City, even though I'm British. And I do some other journalism as well, a little bit of politics writing, book reviewing here and there. But this is my sort of, the thing I guess I'm really passionate about is all this stuff that comes very loosely under the heading of psychology, and trying to, I guess, sort the wheat from the chaff a bit and hold on to what's valid in the world of pop psychology and self-help, while getting rid of all the rubbish.
That's really interesting. But I'm really curious, how did you actually come to be so interested in this area of the impact of technology, particularly on people and the psyche?
I guess, in one sense, I'd always been interested in this stuff, and I'm a little bit suspicious of anybody who claims they never were. On one level, if there are people out there claiming to tell you how to be happier and how to get more things done and feel less busy while being more productive and accomplish things, like, who doesn't want to know the answer to that, right? I think we're all, especially Brits, I think we're a bit sort of accustomed to being very embarrassed about all that sort of stuff and scornful of it, and quite rightly in a large proportion of cases. There's a lot of pseudoscience and false claims. So I've always had this dual relationship with it. I'll mockcall those silly gurus, but at the same time, I'm kind of like, well, I'd quite like to know what's going on here. And the other thing that's really good about psychology as a topic for a journalist is that it is sort of like an excuse never to actually commit to a specialism. It's helpful in journalism to sort of be known for one thing rather than another thing, I think. But like, what isn't psychology? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe like geology isn't psychology. But almost everything that crops up in the news has a psychological aspect. I'm here in America watching the Trump presidency, and it's just a field day for psychology.
So let's move on now to your book, the one that you've published called The Antidote, Happiness for People Who Can't Stand Positive Thinking. What's the main idea behind this book?
The main point of this was, it starts by tackling what I define as positive thinking culture, which runs rampant in the United States, but is pretty prevalent elsewhere too when you look at book sales and all the seminars and events that you can go to. And I broadly define this as the idea that, if you just think the right thoughts, try to feel the right emotions, set really ambitious goals and boldly go after them, refuse to countenance the possibility of failure, all this stuff, that you will, that's the path to success and happiness in life. And I sort of spend a bit of time at the beginning of the book demolishing this, because there's no evidence for it really. That all the most persuasive research suggests that if you try really hard to feel happy, that's just really stressful and you end up feeling worse. that if you're sort of inflexibly obsessed with your goals, this is a way for things to go wrong more frequently, and all the rest of it. But what I mainly try to do in the body of that book is to be a bit more constructive and to say that there is a long tradition, all sorts of different approaches in philosophy and spiritual traditions, which I group together under this title of the negative path to happiness, which means sort of learning to become more comfortable with negative emotions, learning to think seriously about the possibility of failure, and learning to sort of try to embrace the sort of inherent insecurity of life instead of always trying to feel safe and secure. And this links ancient Greek and Roman Stoicism and Buddhism and meditation and bits of New Age thinking and a lot of modern psychological research into things like, growth versus fixed mindsets and all the rest of it. There's a strand running through all this, which basically says, stop trying so hard to feel happy. Stop being so inflexibly obsessed with achieving certain things. Be more open to change and impermanence and uncertainty and insecurity. And actually, it's a more fruitful way of living. You will accomplish more and you will feel more at peace with things. So that's the sort of, in the grandest sense, that's the philosophy. In the book, I sort of, travel around meeting people who put this into practice and sort of explore the argument. That's what it's about in essence.
So one of the things I really wanted to kind of like explore this idea, because I read the book, thought it was amazingly interesting, and I was wondering if you think, Oliver, whether the main idea from the book can be transplanted online. This whole idea of embracing impermanence, even like you were saying, embracing negativity, as it were, for our online lives. Do you think then that would lead to happiness?
I mean, I think that this is one of those areas where the online-offline distinction is less relevant. I don't necessarily go along with people who sort of object philosophically to the very idea that online and offline are any different at all. But I do think that I mean, one thing that just springs to mind is that I think you can do a lot in terms of a fruitful use of social media, for example, if you can countenance the idea of contrary opinions to your own without that being taken as a sort of attempt to totally destroy your ego, and if you can learn to exist in a world of sort of dissent and different opinions, which generally speaking, positive thinking mindset sort of rejects and doesn't want to have any truck with. I suppose that another thing that, again, just springs to mind, it might not be exactly what you're focused on here, but if I look at my own detrimental use of the internet, if I look at the times when I get sucked into Twitter for like an hour and a half and I didn't want to be, and it wasn't useful and it was just annoying and it wasted time I could have used for something better or whatever, that often is, I think, in preference to it's sort of a way of not having to feel various difficult emotions, So in an extreme case, if you're having a big argument with your partner or something, you just feel so sort of in turmoil, you just go and you just want to go and zone out on the internet. But in a much more day-to-day way, because I don't have daily big rows with my partner, thankfully. If you're struggling with writing a paragraph in a piece of writing, it's a little bit difficult. It's not a pleasant thing to be trying to do that. In those moments, it's just so much nicer to run away and just see what people are doing on social media. So that's an example of how an intolerance of difficult emotions sort of leads to something that can resemble an addiction. And that's, I think that's what's at the heart of more traditional addictions too, right? I mean, so like alcoholism and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. That idea of escapism that you're talking about there, and while and this whole, I really want to kind of explore this idea actually of you were saying that there's no real distinction that you don't find philosophically between our online lives and being offline. You think, or you either intimated that it's just life.
Well, I don't know that I was sort of saying I don't always, I think people take that a little bit far. I'm aware of some sort of new media philosophy people who want to say, like, stop telling us that online is the problem and offline is the good and fruitful and thoughtful place to be, because this distinction is just becoming less and less meaningful. I think it is becoming less and less meaningful, right? I mean, when your home is, when you've got smoke alarms and heating run in your home off your smartphone, it just gets ridiculous to try to maintain the distinction. But I think, we're not there yet, and there are still some useful benefits to distinction. I suppose where it comes into the whole issue of digital mindfulness and conscious computing and things like that is it raises this question of, like, is the only way we can stay sane in the midst of all this to shut off the internet? Or are there ways that we can be fully integrated into online and still mindful and sane? Do I have to only go on like detox camps for a week where I'm not allowed to bring my smartphone in the door? That might have some benefits, but it's not a practical way to live these days. Sometimes I feel like I would to forever, but then I realize, no, A, it's professionally useful, and B, it's just genuinely, wholesomely fulfilling in certain ways. So I think that you go too far down that road of distinguishing them. I don't know how you feel about this, but you get to this sense where sanity lies in rejecting one of them for the other, and I don't think that's going to be very feasible.
Well, actually, I was going to ask you about this a bit later on, but this is a perfect opportunity to talk about this insofar as you might well have seen that Ofcom released a report recently, in fact, just I think last week, saying that 15 million UK adults have admitted to taking digital detoxes as a way of balancing their digitised lives. And I was wondering if you were surprised by this.
I guess I'm surprised that the idea has caught on so widely. I kind of tend to think that geeky people like me and maybe you who are into this stuff are in a tiny minority. But I think the idea that there is that sort of awareness that there is something that isn't right in terms of your own happiness and peace of mind in just being always through your phone, updating Facebook, Twitter, constantly connected to news headlines, push notifications and things like that. I mean, I think I'm not surprised that is a widespread awareness, because I think a lot of people from just anecdotal conversations have had the experience I've had, which is, when I do say to myself on a given day, I am not going to, I'm writing a hard bit of a book I'm working on or something, I'm not going to go on Twitter at all. If I actually stick to that resolution to the end of the day, like, the day does go better. I feel like an old fogey admitting it, but it sort of does. And so, I think we're all cluing up to the idea that there is something that needs to be adjusted here. Yeah.
It's funny, because today sat myself down and wrote an article about this, and it's interesting because you said just before I asked you that previous question that the digital detox, the kind of self-enforced removal of technology from our lives, or us from technology, it's an extreme response, isn't it, to this, to the feeling that technology is encroaching over us uncontrollably. And the thing that I wrote today was actually, I think the headline screams to me of lots of different interesting things. Like, for example, now I think now we're learning to understand that the quality of life that we live with technology is important to us now. And I think that's that's one of the things that this speaks of. And this isn't something that certainly before I never really used to think of, not before starting this project. Kind of growing up with Nintendo and stuff like that, like I just never ever thought of this kind of thing. But thinking actually, wow, there is, much like with food and much, in general, there is a quality of life that I can live in this digitized world, and kind of going cold turkey and taking myself off grid isn't the answer. But accepting this tech unfettered into my life is, for me, is not the answer either. But I'm wondering that for you, because, obviously you're a journalist, you're right in the heart of it in Brooklyn. Do you do things like this? Do you do detoxes?
Yeah, I mean, I set up all sorts of constantly changing rules that I try to enforce on myself. I mean, I've done a few more slightly extreme things. I went on it wasn't specifically about online things, but I went on a meditation retreat for about a week. Oh yeah, that's right. I wrote about one in the book, and then I went on another one just a few weeks ago. And I think actually when I went on that first one, which a few years ago now, I wasn't addicted to. I mean, I may have only just joined Twitter, or not even have joined Twitter. You can tell that Twitter is the thing for me. That's the issue here. But anyway, I don't recall back then feeling like the break from technology was hugely significant. In fact, it took me a very long time to get anything that really deserved the name of a smartphone, and I may not have had one 6 years ago. But like last couple of months ago, that was an incredibly noticeable part of going on a silent meditation retreat for 6 days, same place in the woods of Massachusetts, and it was very interesting. We were obviously all instructed that we couldn't use our devices. It'd be stupid to do so. You would be cheating yourself. But then one of the teachers also then sort of announced that if we wanted to, we could get an envelope from the front desk and put our phone or tablet or whatever in them, and they would keep them in a safe in the office that they have there, so that you literally couldn't get at them. And I did that. They didn't make a big play of this, so I think most people didn't bother. And then a couple of days into the retreat, this teacher said that, I don't know whether, she wasn't really telling people off, but she was just sort of saying that sometimes it happens that people think it's okay to go back and check the internet from their rooms. And if they do that, they're not going to punish you at this place. It's far too nice. But you're defeating the purpose of what you're trying to do here, which is to bring yourself and your attention completely into the present physical moment. And she made this case, which I don't know if it's true, but it was fascinating, that like if there's a group of people like that who are meeting every day, 40 people in a room to be silent for whole chunks of time, that if some of them are going back to their private individual rooms and closing the door and slightly frazzling themselves by checking all their email, but this somehow is detrimental to the atmosphere of the whole community, which is kind of like I don't know, maybe it's not true, but it's kind of like I really enjoyed thinking about that idea that maybe other people being frazzled by sort of completely attention scattered, endless addiction to the internet has an effect on me, even when I'm not in that state, and vice versa. So that's interesting. And then, yes, I do sort of things like on a good day, if you check Twitter today, you'll find this was not a good day, but on a good day, I will not be on any kind of social media or email until lunchtime, internet only if I really need it for the work I'm doing, just to preserve a few hours in the morning for the hardest bit of writing. And then afterwards, it's all downhill from there.
Right. So I really want to talk about this column, the regular column that you write in The Guardian. This column will change your life. And I really enjoy reading it, and it's all about social psychology and self-help culture, as you mentioned before. And I was wondering, and on this column as well, you write a lot about online culture and how to live a good digital life. And I was wondering if you could this is totally putting you on the spot, so take your time in answering this, but what would you describe as some of your top pieces of advice for living a good digital life?
Well, I think one that springs immediately to mind, maybe a more important one will crop up as I speak, but is just this idea of having some awareness about your default settings, I suppose would be the simplest way of talking about it. This idea that, email is the obvious example because we've now gone through a decade of people learning how best to manage email. It doesn't feel more than a decade, obviously, but and I think that a switch that I, by and large, have successfully made is away from this idea that email is always open, that the default is that I get pinged if an email arrives, that one tab on my browser is always email, to a situation where the default state is that I'm not on my email, and then I, consciously go into it and deal with it. Now, maybe I'll end up doing that 30 times a day, and it won't make much difference than if I had just had it on in the background the whole time. But sometimes I will succeed in doing that, 2 or 3 or 4 times a day. And so you move away from this way of thinking where frenzy is the basic state. Occasionally, you might be lucky enough to get an oasis of calm and focus. And to the extent possible, depends on your situation, depends on your job, family situation, to the extent possible, you make calm and peacefulness the place you live, and the sort of frenzy the thing that you dip into. And so just that sort of finding ways to make that switch, which can be as easy as, turning notifications off. I still can't believe that there are people whose phone beeps every time they get an email. I think there must be fewer and fewer of them as our inboxes get cluttered with nonsense. But Twitter, certainly, for example, I took that off my phone a long time ago. I very occasionally, at certain live events or something, might download it again temporarily. But that would just be crazy if I was getting a notification for Twitter stuff. So that, I think, is a really important thing. Easier said than done, as all these things are. But
that's actually interesting, because I know that Tristan Harris, who runs Time Well Spent and kind of talks about these things, he talks about the idea of having a mindful iPhone, and he kind of alludes to what you were just speaking about, like almost like taking off the apps that will distract you. Like Twitter, for example. Twitter, like it, I think part of the default settings is that it will alert you even when, not even when people follow you or you get a direct message, but just things you might be interested in, or things that, like in your second or third degree network, were posting things you're not interested in at all. And so he was saying, interestingly, that these kinds of things lead to notification fatigue. You don't know what's important anymore. Would you say that your phone is mindful then, if you've taken off things like Twitter?
I think my phone is not doing a bad job of it. I have, I only have like a screen and a half of apps, and I see people who have like 7 screens. I don't have Twitter or Facebook on it. I usually have the email on it switched off, actually, but I switch that on quite a bit more frequently than the social media, because it's just not feasible to, if you're working out in the field or whatever, you need to be able to do that. And then, I have a bunch of these apps like Noisely that plays wonderful nature sounds in my ears when I'm working on trains and buses or things like that. So, it's probably a relatively mindful smartphone.
One of the things you also wrote about was this idea of friendship, with regards to, linking that with social networking, and just with regards to a good digital life. Would you encourage people to think about that as well? Would that be on one of your kind of?
Yeah, no, definitely. Thanks for the cue, because you're completely right. I think that what this does, what's the internet does to our sense of who we're close to and what we know about them, is completely fascinating. For someone like me who's got lots of family back in England, it's been, and friends, old friends, it's been completely invaluable. I couldn't have the life I have today without the internet. I probably wouldn't have come to the US in the first place. And so it's obviously fantastic, but there are a number of, a few famous problems with this, like the fact that all the people you're connected to on Facebook, you only see like the highlights reels of their lives, and it's very hard not to make detrimental comparisons about your own life to theirs, because all they seem to be doing is going on wonderful holidays and getting married and having parties. But of course, that's just because they're only posting on Facebook about their wonderful holidays and their weddings and their parties, not because that's all their lives consist of. There's also a big problem in the sort of flattening, I think, of friendships and contact such that, I mean, every email in my inbox is in some sense is equal, right? It's just another email. But some of them are from people I deeply care about and never want to lose touch with. Some of them are people I like very well enough. And some of them are just pure work things. And this horrible thing happens where, an email I get that I don't particularly care about gets a quick response because it's very easy and straightforward to say, oh, yes, please send me that thing, or no, thank you, not interested in this, or something. And yeah, I'm always waiting till I've got a bit better at this actually. You don't feel like enough time and energy to give the proper response to your friend's wonderful newsy update. And so the person you care about the most gets the worst attention, and the person you care about the least gets the most, which is a sort of sad state of affairs. One other quick thing that I think has been really interesting for me, it might not be relevant to most people, so I'll just be quick, but as an expat here, I think Robin Dunbar, who wrote about this idea that we only have the capacity for 150 real relationships at any one time in our lives, from a point of view of sort of evolutionary psychology. We can't handle many more than that, and only a smaller number when it comes to really close friendships, obviously. He also has written about how we're in this strange situation now where it's so easy to travel the world, relatively speaking, and it's so easy to stay in touch with people from the place that you left, and this is obviously very near to my heart. You get this odd situation, right? Because centuries ago, people just grew up and stayed in the village where they were born, and you were just in your same family and friends for the whole of your lives. Then there was this phase when there was lots of immigration, but it was, people got on a boat at Liverpool to come to New York. They were probably never going to see their family again. And they sort of had to make a big switch and put down roots in the new place and fully embrace their new life. And there's a weird downside to the situation of slightly privileged people like me who get to, come and live in New York, which is that I'm so in touch with people in Britain who I still, so important to me. I'm not about to jettison, but like half my mind is in Britain the whole day. And it's a slightly a disincentive to really put down roots and get connected and knitted into the social fabric of the place where you are. So it's a kind of strange phenomenon that combines the internet with relatively cheap, fast and affordable international travel. Creates this sense where a lot of us, I think, our minds are always half somewhere else, which is not all good at all.
That's so interesting, isn't it? Like, it is almost disembodying this, that phenomenon you were just talking about. And I know you mentioned that there's some debate from, the new media philosophers saying that actually, no, this is not online or offline. There's no distinction. There's no dichotomy. It's just life. But you're right. You're thousands of miles away from the UK, but there are portions of the day when you are there. I think I have largely solved this problem because I have figured out that you just need to put really conscious effort into being a part of your local community. So I joined a community choir in Brooklyn and made all sorts of efforts to embed myself, and it's worked and it's great. But it took some effort. Whereas in days gone by, we're all just naturally gregarious to some degree, and that would be what you did. You went to say hello to your neighbor. And now that you don't have to do that in order to have engaging social time, it does lead to a risk of sort of becoming disembodied from where you really are, I think. So one of the things you wrote about a few years ago now was this idea of conscious computing and the slow web movement. And now, 3 years on, what are your thoughts about slow computing? Do you think it has a place now that our society is so hyper-connected?
Yeah, I think it does. I watch the progress of that movement in interesting ways. I think in some ways, it hasn't yet fulfilled its promise, obviously. We are mainly still, in this sort of epic battle for our attention and all sorts of ways to try to keep us knitted into clicking and clicking and clicking. On the other hand, I think some of my understanding, I'm not really deeply involved in the sort of the metrics side of online journalism, but my understanding is that the idea that sheer clicks is everything is beginning to be replaced with in online media with an understanding that how much attention someone is paying to a individual piece really matters. The growth of long-form journalism on the web has been completely amazing. I mean, there's just a huge amount of stuff that takes quite a lot of time to really focus on and read. So how far these kinds of conscious things have not caught on versus how far they've just become embedded into the mainstream, I'm not too clear. But I think you also see a bit less of, I think you see newspapers and news organizations being a little bit less about a million updates a minute and a little bit more about, come to us for analysis and reflection. This is from my sort of journalistic corner, I guess, of the thing. I think slightly more abstractly, I'm always a bit skeptical about slow anything, slow food, slow internet, whatever. I think that slowing down is slightly not the point. It might be very helpful, and if you can do it, then you're probably going to be happier. But it's more to do with something like, just to get briefly Buddhist about it, it's something like non-attachment. It's something to do with not having your attention completely sort of owned by devices and the internet and things like that, being able to more easily unhook. What you might then choose to do in your state of being unhooked and not having your attention dragged around by Silicon Valley corporations is, it might not look like a slow life. You might decide to use that to have a very fast life. But building in those tools, I think does really. I think it, and I feel like things like freedom, these apps that block your access to the internet temporarily, these things seem to be adapting to the changed terrain. So I think it's there's lots of promise there still.
Okay, so it's still for you a nascent movement, if you like, but there's room for it to stretch its arms. It may be never anything more than a minority position, right? Because at this point, I don't see. It seems to me that the economic incentives of to make really big fortunes in Silicon Valley, you can't do that in ways that are to do with getting people to not use your service too much or to step back from it all the time. And you get these things that the business model. I don't know if it's true about Pokemon Go, but I assume the business model of Pokemon Go, like a lot of them, is totally dependent on a small number of heavy users making totally unwise amounts of in-game purchases, and so at the core of how it works as a business is this need to keep people hooked. And I'm not yet aware of any way of making Facebook style money from telling people to disconnect. That's fine for most of us who never expected to make Facebook style money, but these things will determine the overall direction of the industry, I assume. Oliver, where can people find out more about you and your work?
Well, you can. My website is oliverburkeman.com, Burkeman. Shortly to be properly relaunched, but then aren't people always saying that about their websites? Also, Oliver Burkeman on Twitter is actually where I am most frequently. And if you feel like getting the book, The Antidote, on audiobook or Kindle or hard copy, obviously that's amazing. So.
Fantastic. Oliver Burkeman, it's been a complete pleasure speaking to you. There's so much more I wish we could have spoken about, but thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.